I think Cult of the Lamb could have been a perfect game. And before I get into any critique, I feel the need to hammer home that what this game already has is pretty good. It has an extremely strong presentation. It's a game you can really tell was made by visual artists. It oozes personality, and it has a strong grasp on how to blend its cute characters with horror elements to create an unforgettable aesthetic. The sound design and soundtrack is some of the best I've ever come across, full stop. It perfectly complements the visual style of the game, and I found myself humming the music for weeks after completing it. The core systems of the game are a 50-50 split between a colony simulator and a roguelite action game, and that is extremely unique. When I first picked it up, I was teleported back to when I was a kid, and I would daydream about mashing two of my favorite games together. What if Halo 2 and Sid Meier's Pirates were combined, and Master Chief would be fighting aliens, but also he had a spaceship, and he could marry women? Wouldn't that just be incredible? I really tried to think of another game that had this same split between two distinct game types, and I couldn't really come up with one. But hey, if you know an example, let me know. Cult of the Lamb is a well-loved game, both critically and by the masses. Part of the reason that I even made this video is that I saw that this game has a really active fandom of people making art and stories about characters from Cult of the Lamb, and that really intrigued me, given the overall impression that I came away from this game with. There's something about Cult of the Lamb that gets its hooks into you, and I think that is the reason I've spent so much time coming back to this game. But the more I've played it, the more that I realize that this game falls short for me in many ways. It pulls you in with its presentation and novelty at first, but as you spend more time with it, the cracks begin to show. You start to realize that the game is relying on its visuals to keep you going more than its underlying game design. And you're kind of left wondering, could this have been better? Could this have had equally good mechanics that it does visuals? I've played this game 3 times, all the way through. First when it came out in 2022, the second time in 2024 where I played multiplayer, and then again this year, 2025, for this video. If you're not familiar with the game, the main game loop is as follows. You go out on a crusade, you fight through a dungeon, you defeat a boss, and then you return to your cult. You maintain your cult, you preach a sermon, you use materials from your crusade to upgrade your cult, which in turn can upgrade your effectiveness in crusades. And that kind of just goes back and forth until the end of the game. In this video, I'm gonna focus primarily on these 2 main game systems, which are the Roguelite Dungeon Crawler Crusades and the Colony Sim Cult section, which you switch back and forth between. And I think now is a good time to say, there's not gonna be any significant story spoilers for the game in this video. Let's start with Crusades. Crusades are the roguelike dungeon crawler part of this game. The formula here is pretty standard to anyone familiar with these types of games. Games like Hades, Binding of Isaac, etc. You move room to room, fighting enemies, collecting upgrades, and progressing towards an eventual boss. The combat is pretty good in Cult of the Lamb. The animations are flashy and smooth, there's a decent variety of weapons, and fights go by quickly. There's a very consistent sense of motion. The main problem with Crusades, and what I think ultimately made this part of the game feel stale to me, is that every run feels the same. There are 2 things that contribute to this problem. The first are tarot cards, which serve as your main upgrades. The second and perhaps more fundamental issues are with the loadouts you're given at the start of each run, your weapons and magic. Let's start with tarot cards, which I think are the easier fix here. So the main driver of games like this are upgrades. The success of each run is more or less determined by which upgrades you get and whether you can put together a complementary build that lets you steamroll your enemies. In Cult of the Lamb, this just isn't the case. Tarot cards do not really make a substantial difference on the success of your run, nor do they change the way a run plays in any significant way. There are 2 main factors that contribute to that problem, the first being that you simply do not get enough tarot cards on any given run. On average, you're going to have maybe 5 tarot cards before you hit the boss of any given run, after which that run will end and you'll start from the beginning. Now, if these tarot cards were substantial upgrades, or provided meaningful change to the way you played, 5 could be enough. But unfortunately, that just isn't the case with this game. As of right now, there are 66 tarot cards in Cult of the Lamb. After removing everything that doesn't directly affect combat or is extremely situational, we are left with only 20 cards. Of those 20 cards, only a small handful have any sort of synergy, and those synergies are extremely basic and honestly pretty boring. Because you are given so few tarot cards on a run, and because so many don't mesh with each other, you will almost never have a run that is distinctly different from any other. In most Crusades, you could completely ignore tarot cards, and it would likely only be marginally harder than one where you got all of them. Now, this I think is an easy fix. The easy solution is just to add more tarot cards that synergize with each other, and to increase the odds of drawing these cards that can give you a distinct build, a distinct feeling to the game. Some very basic suggestions would be cards that add stacks of some debuff. There's already a poison mechanic in the game, maybe build that out more. Maybe more cards that interact with spells, adding AoE spell damage, causing enemies killed by spells to refund part of their cost, things like that. You've played games like this before, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about these upgrades. But I'm not going to go too in depth here, because before I get to my main suggestion about improving Crusades, we should talk about equipment first. So at the start of each run, you are given a random weapon and a random spell from your pool of unlocked equipment. As you proceed through your crusade, you'll run into other randomized weapons or spells which are of a higher level than your starting equipment, so it is always an upgrade to take a new spell or weapon. At first blush, this seems sensible. It provides better damage, and it oftentimes gets you to switch up your weapon midway through, which can provide some much needed variety and freshness. However, the issue here is that because you are always incentivized to change your weapon or spell, you can't form a coherent build or playstyle around that loadout. It's always going to change, and in fact, you're going to be setting yourself back if you don't switch them out. So when we put these two things together, we kinda see that the equipment system and the tarot card system are at odds with each other. If you make a distinct build with tarot cards, it's very likely that build will be most useful on a certain weapon. For instance, a crit chance build would work best on a fast weapon like a dagger or sword, and not so much on a hammer. The easiest solution here, in my mind, would be to lock you to one weapon and spell for your entire run. It could be random, or you could do what other games do where you choose your loadout, and sometimes you're incentivized to switch it up. Maybe you get upgrade materials or free tarot cards to encourage players not to just choose the same weapon every time. But if they want to, that's up to them. If you're locked to a weapon, you could also add tarot cards that are specific to the weapon you're using. For instance, the hammer could be given a faster charge up for its special attack, or the blunderbuss could get a more narrow spread. By not having to worry about the player switching weapons halfway through the run, the game has more flexibility to play with the equipment the player already has. To account for these changes, and to take advantage of the new tarot card synergies that I suggested earlier, I think the average length of a crusade would need to increase. Right now, you can breeze through an entire crusade in less than 10 minutes. That is very short for games in this genre. The runs being this short are in a lot of ways a reason why the systems here are so simplistic. So I would say they should bump that up to an average runtime of 25 to 30 minutes at the very least. Now, there's more I could say here, but this video is already going to be longer than I want it to be, and unfortunately I've only just now talked about half of the game. So let's move on to the cult. So the other half of this game is a sort of light colony simulator. You have a group of cultists who you need to keep fed, sanitary, and generally faithful. In exchange, they give you devotion, which lets you level up both your cult, as well as giving you increased effectiveness in Crusades. This part of the game is where its personality really shines. When people talk about Cult of the Lamb, they are probably talking about this part of the game for the most part, with the Crusades being an afterthought. All of the characters here are full of personality and expression. They're all extremely cute and mashed together with this insidious cult and its dark rituals. It's a perfect combination, which is really genuinely unique and fun. The cult is arguably the only reason to continue playing the game after you beat the final boss as well. Once you've beaten that final boss, there's very little reason to engage with the Crusades outside of the occasional quest or maybe to farm materials. The Crusade doesn't really evolve in the post-game, but the cult does, sort of. I can break down my issues with the cult part of this game into 3 interlinked problems. Problem number 1. Managing your cult is tedious. When you first start Cult of the Lamb, you have to do everything for your cultists. You have to do all the farming yourself, you have to cook for them all by yourself, you have to clean up after them, and you have to manually walk over to them every day and bless them to increase their loyalty. Because resources in Cult of the Lamb are limited, you're going to spend way more time doing maintenance than you are going to be doing the fun things like building new structures or decorating. Now, I don't think this is immediately a huge problem. Tons of games follow a general structure where you start out doing things manually and then they gradually get automated and more efficient so you can focus on bigger and better things. My problem here is threefold. Firstly, some tasks never get automated. Even in the end game, you still have to empty out janitor stations, bless your followers, retrieve materials from your mines and refineries, collect devotion, and treat sick villagers yourself. Some of these activities, particularly ones where you're directly interacting with your followers, feel really slow. Farming and blessing in particular are painfully slow and really tedious for a long time, and some of them until the very end of the game. You never get any improvement. Secondly, the rate at which you unlock these automation options is very lethargic. I didn't unlock the ability to have my cultists feed themselves until I was nearly 75% through the game. And even then, you need to manually stock your farms with seeds, as well as individually queue up recipes, so you really don't actually save that much time. It doesn't feel like they're really even doing anything themselves. Third, and a slightly different problem, is that you spend way more time doing the boring part of the cult than doing anything fun. For me, the fun part of a colony game is building stuff and seeing how it changes how my colonists behave. But Cult of the Lamb really lacks in that department. You are rarely building new things, and very, very few of the things you build meaningfully change how your cult operates. Speaking on that point, let's move on to our second item, which is progression is unsatisfying. The progression and how you unlock new buildings especially feels really weird in Cult of the Lamb. The only way to unlock new buildings is by gathering devotion from your followers. The more followers you have worshipping you, the more devotion you get. On average, you will probably unlock one new building every time you come back from a crusade. On paper, this sounds fine, but many of the things you unlock feel as though they come far too late. For instance, your cultists are not able to harvest any of the crops you plant until the second to last tier of buildings. This is 3 tiers after you originally gained the ability for them to plant and water crops themselves. And what I find the most frustrating about this is that harvesting your crops is the part that takes the most time. You have to go through this whole animation to get anything. Of anything I would have wanted, that would be the first thing I'd want to do away with. I can handle the planting myself, it's easy. You don't unlock something as basic as a toilet for your cultists until the 3rd tier of unlocks, meaning you have to unlock 10 other buildings before your cultists will stop shitting on the ground or cleaning at all. Your cultists can't cook and feed themselves until the very last tier of buildings. That's after 25 other buildings have been unlocked minimum. All that time just to have a kitchen. And even then, you still have to manually queue up what will be cooked, which results in a very small amount of time actually saved, like I mentioned before. These basic features feel really stretched out, and so when I unlock them, I don't think, awesome, that's a great upgrade, but rather I think, finally, why did that take so long? Most of the unlocks for your cult feel like things you should have had from the start, but instead you get drip-fed the most basic of features. So my solution here is that necessities like farming, cooking, and sanitation should be unlocked much sooner, and their upgrades should be more interesting. Of course, that would leave a lot of the tech tree looking very sparse near the top, so you need to come up with more compelling additions to the unlock tree. Maybe more ways to manipulate the environment of your cult, or expand the actual size of the grove you're in, or you could have some more advanced buildings that you can actually walk into, like a bunkhouse, a mess hall, that sort of thing. A big problem with the progression is that your cult always feels about the same. The way you interact with it, the things your cultists are doing, they don't ever really significantly change. You very quickly stop needing to learn anything new, which makes the cult go stale very quickly. A crazy amount of unlocks are just improved versions of previous buildings that do not behave any differently except being a little more efficient. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. There was an expansion to this game which added an entire new branch of buildings relating to sin and the pleasures of the flesh. And I think that's a really good start. It's its own thing, it changes behavior, and it changes the way you interact with the game and your cultists. But you unlock that really far into the game. And by that point, I was ready to head for the door. There just wasn't enough to keep me playing. It's definitely on the right track, And if these new systems were added sooner and you had more time to play with them before you finished the main story, I think that could keep things really fresh and interesting. We'll talk about the late game cult in a little bit, but first we should talk about the third and arguably the most meaningful issue laying at the heart of the cult in this game. 3. Your cultists all feel the same. So, as you might expect, your cult is made up of cultists. So much of this game's personality, and the reason so many people fall in love with it, I think, is because of how expressive your cultists are. They're so well animated, and they have so much personality. This is a good thing, but the issue is that they all share the same personality. If you gave every one of your cultists the same name and face, it would be nearly impossible for you to meaningfully distinguish one from the other. At first, I was surprised by this. I had seen so much fan art for this game that I couldn't fathom what people were latching onto, but taking a closer look, I realized that 99% of the fandom material for this game is surrounding the one unique cultist you get after the game ends, which I'm not going to show here to avoid spoilers. Now, before I continue, I want to talk to those critical thinkers out there, those people who are thinking, wait a minute, Colin, isn't it incredibly diegetic that your cultists are brainless sheep who lack individuality, whose only purpose is to feed you their devotion and do manual labor for you? Isn't that actually perfect for a game about being a cult leader? And to that, I have to say, yes, but also no. While I do think it is indeed cool, it ultimately fails because, in my humble opinion, games need to be engaging more than they need to be honest to their world. Also, to make that work, I think the game would have to zoom out a lot with the premise of its cult, but that whole thing could be its own video, and I don't really want to go there right now, so let's move on. So, each cultist, upon being recruited, comes with a handful of traits which serve as the only truly unique thing about them. Now, I think this is a great start, but it doesn't end up being enough because of a few other factors. And I'm going to break this section down individually into its own subsections as well, because it's kind of that complicated and important to me, and I'm a very sick man. Subsection A, the amount of cultists. So, in order to beat Cult of the Lamb, you will need to have at least 12 cultists, but in all likelihood, you're going to have a lot more than that. Every crusade will, at minimum, give you one cultist, with many crusades yielding one or two more. By the time I was fighting the final boss of the game, and I was playing through pretty quickly, I had 20 cultists. Now, this might not sound like a ridiculous number to you, but you have to remember that this game is very, very short. You're going to be getting 1 to 3 new cultists every 10 or 15 minutes when you come back from a crusade. And this pacing made it very hard for me to form any attachment to my cultists. In a way, Cult of the Lamb feels like it's trapped between two types of games. The first is a more intimate game where you have less cultists and you're kind of taking your time understanding their quirks and minutiae, you're forming attachments to them, and you're really basking in their personalities. The second type of game is a game that's more zoomed out. It's an experience where your cultists are more like ants than anything else. In that type of game, they're all interchangeable and they're more like a number than they are individuals. I think Cult of the Lamb wants to be the first, more intimate option. All your cultists are unique and you're growing attached to them. The presence of unique traits and all the cute designs that are in the game support this point, but you just get too many of them too quickly, and that issue alone wouldn't be a huge deal, which leads me to my next subsection, RIS, or Roles, Improvement, and Specialization. In your cult, your workers are more or less interchangeable. With the exception of 2 fairly generic traits, everyone is equally good at all types of work. The vast majority of your cultists are going to be doing one type of work, which is just praying. Prayers generate devotion, which you use to upgrade your cult. The rest are going to be taking over specialty jobs like refining, farming, gathering, or cleaning. In most cases, you won't manually assign anyone to a job. They will automatically go and do whatever job is needed. However, your cultists never really get better at the job you assign them to. You will never really look at a cultist and be like, oh, that's Julmer. He's the cult's farmer. You have no reason to pay attention to who is doing what job. Nobody is really better than anyone else, nobody can be trained to get better, and there isn't enough variety of jobs in the first place anyways. Later on in the game, you unlock the ability to elevate a cultist to be a loyalty enforcer, It gives them a special hat and a special role in the cult to keep everyone in line. This sort of thing, where a cultist is given a special role in the community, gives a lot of personality to your cultist, and I wish there had been a lot more of those things. So my proposition for a fix here would be to have cultists passively level up whatever job they're doing. And then I would give each job their own outfit that stays on as long as that person is assigned to that job, not just when they're actively doing it. I also think there could be more jobs in general. Some could be modified from existing buildings, like for instance the missionary, which lets you send your cultists out to gather materials. That could be made its own job, like someone is always a missionary, they get their own outfit, they get their own role, and they improve as time goes on. Or for instance the medical hut, where you can cure your cultists of sicknesses, maybe one of your cultists could be a doctor. So it's not you doing it, it's a specific cultist that you can get attached to that has their own role in the community. Other jobs could be added to give more flavor to the cult as well. Maybe a fisherman, because there's already fishing in the game, and you could have a cultist in charge of fishing so you don't have to go do the repetitive fishing minigame over and over again. For a really ambitious idea, maybe you could add guards, people who break up fights, or maybe they fight against invaders at some point. That could be a fun thing to add, but that's kind of out of scope, so, you know, whatever. I think these small changes would go a long way in making cultists feel more distinct, and it wouldn't require too substantial of changes. For the most part, it would simply be a matter of adding an outfit and tracking proficiency with how long the cultist has done their job. Now let's move to the last subsection on individuality, which is needs. So your cult has three main bars, I guess. Faith, which represents their general feelings on the cult. Hunger, which is self-explanatory, and sanitation, which represents how clean your cult is and how free it is of messes and corpses. The needs of your cultists are pretty basic, and for the most part, they are not individualized at all. All of the needs you see are kind of represented by the cult as a whole. You don't really have to worry about this cultist or that cultist. There are a couple of exceptions to this, of course. Individual cultists can get sick, requiring you to assign them to a bed or to a medical tent. They can also have crises of faith and become non-believers, which requires you to jail them, re-educate them, or deal with them in some other way. Cultists will also randomly generate basic quests for you to complete for them. This is usually something like build 3 decorations or feed me a bowl of poop. These quests don't, as far as I can tell, have anything to do with the cultists who are requesting them. They're randomly doled out to give you an opportunity to get some easy faith. And I think the general simpleness of the cultists' needs creates a separation between you and them. They don't benefit from having decorations built, they don't have a need for recreation, and they generally don't seem to have any opinions on how you build your cult. The general lack of more complex needs results in your cult feeling very basic. Your cultists don't care if they're all sleeping in a big pile, they don't care that they're eating food off of the floor, or they don't care if your cult is decorated or not. Now, I almost feel like the cultist's individuality is secondary here to a bigger problem, which is that Cult of the Lamb doesn't really care where you put anything. Putting down paths doesn't make your cultists use them or make them walk faster than if they were on grass. Your cultists don't prefer to go hang out around places with more decorations. They're generally uninterested in their surroundings. They will just move in straight lines between work and bathrooms. I think it would be cool if in order to get to higher levels of your cult, you needed to do more customization, like a designated jail area instead of a generic stockade, or setting up a mess hall with tables and chairs and all that. Just anything that give you more reasons and opportunities to build new stuff, but that's not really part of this section. So let's come to some conclusion about the cult. To sum it all up, I think the cult has the most problems, and it's the hardest to fix in any reasonable way. The cult is very shallow, and it's shallow in a way that is deeply problematic. The game wants you to care about the cult and your cultists. The cult is the focal point of the game, Cult of the Lamb. The most work has gone into the cult, as far as I can tell. After you complete the game, the cult is basically the only thing that remains to interact meaningfully with. The game seems structured in a way to encourage you to keep interacting with the cult, even as Crusades become less relevant. But the cult just lacks depth, it lacks complexity or personality, and that can't sustain the load of it being the primary mode of play once you're done with the main campaign. It's easy to ignore these problems when you're bouncing between Crusades and working on beating all the bosses, but once that's gone, there's really nothing to work with. Now let's put all these pieces together and get to the big conclusion about this game. As you've probably noticed by now, a lot of my problems with Cult of the Lamb come from a lack of depth. The Crusades are flat and they all feel the same. The cult is fun and cute, but it feels static. Progression lacks depth, your cultists lack personality or distinction, and just in general, it leaves you wanting more. And I think a lot of this stems from the fact that the game is really short. To beat the entire game, my average playtime across my 3 playthroughs was around 6 hours. That's really short for a game that's trying to be 2 games. Like, that's 3 hours in the Cult and 3 hours in the Crusade. When I was doing my 3rd playthrough for this video, the game felt like a cartoon. Something that's short and funny, but not something that wants you to engage with it on any deeper level. I would compare it to a mobile game, but I think at this point, there's a lot of mobile games that have more depth than Cult of the Lamb. And that's fine, you know? Like, I played the game 3 times, and that's how long it took for me to get sick of it. And all things considered, that's a really good sign. But what frustrates me with Cult of the Lamb is just how close it feels to greatness. Like, it has such a strong core premise, and the art and music and personality is so good that my brain can't help but want more. If this game's aesthetic wasn't as good as it is, I don't think this video would have been made. I think the game would have been a flop. It is pushed so hard by its presentation that you don't really even think about its problems until you're almost done with it anyways. I recognize that I'm coming in here, and it sounds like I'm saying that the developers of this game need to make it twice as long so that I can have my perfect game. You might be thinking, why can't it just be a cute short game? Why does it have to be more? And I get that, I really do. Sometimes you want a game that you can play with your brain off, that isn't a big time sink. But with this game in particular, I feel like they could have done more, that they really had something special and fell short of where it could have landed. That with a little more forethought and commitment, it could have been something really great. And to be honest, I don't even know if it's possible to pull off what I'm asking for. At its core, you are splitting your attention and development time across 2 distinctly different games here. Maybe that's just a fundamental issue that the game can't get past. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Cult of the Lamb couldn't be perfect. Maybe from the very beginning, it was doomed to be 2 half-baked lambs instead of 1 succulent, delicious meal. Oh my god, that's so stupid. So that's the video. It was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, and it took a lot more time to make than my last one. Here at the end of it, I still feel really conflicted about this game, whether it could have been or should have been more than it is. I'd be interested to hear what you think. If you have a different perspective here or have some other thought, please leave a comment. I know a lot of people love this game, and I love it in a lot of ways too. I don't want you to come away from this thinking I hate it. It's a good game. You should play it. You should try it. It's easy. It's short. But that's it. Thank you for giving me the privilege of your time, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye-bye.